The wind from the Atlantic smelled of salt, and something older, like dust blown from forgotten chests that were never meant to be opened. Seville still slept when footsteps echoed across the creaking pier. A man in a dark cloak stopped in front of the ship named Santa Rosa. Its sails were already set, its hold full, but the captain had yet to give the order to depart. "They say there's a city," someone whispered behind him. "A city with towers made of gold, guarded by a river that breathes." "Foolish tales," another voice grunted. "The jungle holds nothing but sickness and snakes. But mystery, it always smells stronger than gunpowder." That morning, a man long believed to be dead returned to port. His steps were slow, his eyes hollow, and his fingers clutched a charred notebook. Those who recognized him stepped back in fear. It was Don Ignacio de Mendoza, the captain of an expedition that had vanished 6 years ago into the Amazon, without a single word since. He said nothing. He simply held out the book. There were no maps. Only words, uneven, trembling strokes of ink. The pages smelled of damp, of soot, and something else. Something you couldn't quite name, but that made you want to lean away. I received that journal many years later, passed down by my grandfather, the very boy who worked at the docks that day. Between the lines of yellowed paper, there was something that wouldn't let me sleep. We went in search of gold. But the gold was not what it seemed. The Amazon does not scream. It listens. And when you ignore its silence, it begins to speak. My grandfather always said the captain was already dead the moment he stepped off the ship. And yet, I couldn't let the story go. The journal mentioned a name, Orellana. The man who, legend said, was the first to cross the Amazon. But the pages weren't about what he found, they were about what he left behind. One passage spoke of a lagoon where a god sleeps. Another of a tribe that draws maps in sand, maps that vanish with the first breath of wind. Shimmering stones that whisper at night. Voices in caves. Bodies without shadows. Vines that move even when the air is still. It could all be the ravings of a fevered mind. But some of the details matched reports from other lost expeditions. Was there truly something in the heart of the Amazon, something men were not meant to find? This story is not about conquest. It's about those who went too far. About gold that cannot be taken. And a voice that speaks when you are alone in the trees. Pizarro was dead. The streets of Lima whispered of betrayal, shadows, and gold buried deeper than reason. Yet for Don Ignacio de Mendoza, the war was not over. Not while the jungle still kept its secrets. The year was 1541. A gray morning hung over the city of Lima, stretched thin like parchment. At the edge of the plaza, horses stomped nervously, and men loaded crates of gunpowder and salted meat onto a row of pack mules. Muskets, rosaries, and a handful of stained maps lay scattered over a table in the governor's courtyard. Don Ignacio stood quietly among them. He was not a loud man, not like the others, who roared songs and laughed too hard. He carried a thin scar across his cheek, and a look in his eyes like he'd already seen something the rest hadn't. A letter had arrived 2 days earlier. Not by messenger. It was found inside a satchel, clutched in the hand of a dying native man who stumbled out of the forest north of Quito, soaked in blood and rain. No one could read it. It was written in Castilian, but in a frantic, broken hand, full of ink blots and torn edges. Only one word stood out on the first page. Oro. Gold. The rest was madness. We crossed the Black River. The trees watch us. Father Esteban speaks to himself now. There is something under the earth. A city of light and water and screaming. Some called it a trick. Some said it was a warning. But Ignacio, he recognized the handwriting. It belonged to Captain Luis Herrera, a man who had vanished 2 years ago with 40 men, chasing whispers of El Dorado into the belly of the jungle. The church called El Dorado a heresy. The crown called it a distraction. But men like Herrera, and now Mendoza, called it something else. Unfinished business. That evening, by torchlight, the men sealed their plans. 80 soldiers, 2 Franciscan monks, 6 horses, 1 scribe. They would leave Lima in 10 days. Their route would take them east, beyond Cusco, into the mountainous cloud forests, and then, down the river whose name few could pronounce and none could trust, Amarumayu. The Snake River. Local tribes refused to go near it. They said it wasn't a river, but a wound in the earth, left when the gods cursed something beneath. But Mendoza listened. And he marked a place on the map. Not where the gold was said to be, but where the letter ended. A cliff beside a lake. Unmarked. Unknown. Ominous. The night before departure, as the city slept, Mendoza stood at the edge of his chambers, staring out over the flickering lanterns of Lima. He held the letter again. One line, smudged by water, stared back at him. We buried the others. The jungle took them back. But the gold wouldn't sink. He did not sleep that night. And when dawn came, the jungle, like a mouth, opened wide to receive him. The river was alive. Don Ignacio de Mendoza had heard the whispers before, murmurs from the native tribes, wary glances toward the dark water. Yet nothing prepared him for what awaited when the expedition reached the banks of the Amarumayu, the Snake River. The jungle pressed in tightly from every side, thick and dark, alive with buzzing insects and the cries of distant animals. The air was heavy, soaked with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. The river itself flowed sluggishly, its surface stained with a strange golden shimmer that caught the sunlight like liquid fire, but there was an unsettling stillness beneath. Locals told stories of Yakamama, the mother of waters, a serpent spirit said to dwell in the river's depths, guardian and predator all at once. They warned that she could rise at night to swallow whole canoes, dragging men into the eternal darkness beneath the waves. At camp, tension hung thick. The soldiers whispered in hushed tones, eyes fixed on the river's black mirror. One evening, as the fire crackled and the moon cast long shadows through the trees, strange sounds drifted from the riverbank, low, guttural whispers that seemed almost human. The men stiffened. Father Esteban clutched his rosary tighter, muttering prayers he barely believed. Luis, a young soldier with wide eyes, claimed he saw glowing eyes beneath the water's surface, staring back at him with unblinking malice. The men scoffed, but unease spread like wildfire. 2 nights later, during a midnight patrol, the screams began. The camp woke to chaos. 2 soldiers were missing, their weapons lying abandoned on the muddy shore. Search parties scoured the jungle, but found nothing. Only disturbed mud and broken reeds hinted at their fate. Fear took root. Don Ignacio paced the river's edge, watching the black water ripple though no wind stirred. The jungle seemed to lean in, closing ranks like a predator waiting to strike. The river breathed, slow, deliberate, as if warning the intruders to leave. At times, the men claimed they heard voices carried on the humid night air, voices calling in strange tongues, promising wealth and doom in the same breath. Father Esteban confessed in a whispered prayer that he felt evil growing stronger here, a darkness beyond mortal sin. Some soldiers began to shun the river, refusing to fish or drink its water. Yet the expedition pressed on. The lure of gold was a hunger that could not be sated by fear. And beneath the shimmering surface, Yakamama waited, patient, eternal, watching. The jungle was no longer just a backdrop, it had become an entity, alive, watching, breathing. After days of relentless trek through the oppressive heat and tangled undergrowth, the expedition's spirits began to waver. Food was scarce, the constant drizzle soaked their clothes, and the air hung thick with the scent of decay and damp wood. The river, once a silver thread in the distance, now roared faintly through the thick canopy, a relentless reminder that the wilderness held dominion here. One late afternoon, when the sun was low and the shadows long, the men emerged into a small clearing, unlike any they had seen before. It was alive with smoke spiraling lazily from several huts woven from palm fronds and rough-hewn timber. The scent of burning herbs and resin hung heavy in the air, mingling with the unmistakable hum of voices chanting softly in a rhythm that felt older than the earth itself. Out from the huts stepped members of a local tribe, the Yuri. Their bodies were painted in intricate patterns of ochre, charcoal, and red earth, the designs shifting and flowing like living tattoos beneath the dappling light of the canopy. Their eyes gleamed with a wild knowledge of the forest, sharp and unblinking, measuring every newcomer with the cautious grace of seasoned hunters. The leader of the Yuri was a tall man named Apu, his presence commanding yet serene. His skin was marked with thin scars, symbols of past battles and rituals, and his voice carried a deep resonance as he spoke in a tongue foreign to the Spaniards. Though no common language bridged the divide, gestures, shared glances, and the universal language of survival forged a fragile understanding. Apu carried with him an object wrapped tightly in worn cloth, a bundle that seemed sacred. Slowly, carefully, he revealed it, a map unlike any the Spaniards had ever seen. It was no parchment nor crafted paper, but a living thing, drawn meticulously in the soft sand of a shallow wooden tray. Delicate lines and symbols wove and curved like roots, shifting slightly with every breath of the humid jungle air. The map seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Don Ignacio studied the sand map intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. How could this shifting, fragile image guide them through the endless labyrinth of vines and shadows? Yet the map seemed more than a mere guide, it was a warning, a riddle etched in earth and spirit. Apu's words, slow and deliberate, resonated in the heavy air. This is the way to the city of gold, the place you seek. But beware. The path is a trap. The jungle watches, and it does not forgive those who walk blindly. To follow this map is to invite both fortune and death. Many have tried. None have returned. A shiver ran through the men. The jungle was more than hostile, it was a living maze, alive with ancient forces, spirits older than any king or crown. And yet, the hunger for gold, for glory, and the promise of a city whose walls gleamed with pure gold, was a hunger stronger than fear. That night, beneath the trembling light of flickering campfires, the men dreamed. Dreams filled with shining towers rising above endless green canopies, rivers of molten gold flowing through forgotten cities, and crowds of silent, watchful faces painted in gold dust. But not all dreams were bright. Some men saw shadows stalking just beyond the firelight, dark shapes that moved with impossible speed, eyes glowing like embers in the night. Father Esteban's voice was somber. The jungle is a test, a trial of spirit. It separates those who seek gold with greed from those who seek it with reverence. True gold is not the metal beneath the earth, but the spirit within the soul. To find it, you must listen, not merely look. But listening was hard when the jungle whispered secrets in tongues unknown, and the map in the sand shifted as if alive, teasing, beckoning. As dawn stretched her rosy fingers through the canopy, the expedition prepared to follow the shifting lines of the sand map. They stepped cautiously, aware that every footfall echoed in a labyrinth built by time and shadow. The journey that followed was a slow, agonizing passage deeper into the unknown. The sand map led them through winding trails choked with vines, across swollen rivers alive with unseen creatures, and into groves where the light itself seemed to bend and flicker. Along the way, the men faced dangers both natural and unnatural. There were sudden storms that fell without warning, drenching them in cold rain that chilled to the bone. They found ancient totems carved with faces twisted in silent screams, scattered bones bleached white beneath the leaf litter, and the remnants of other lost souls who had come seeking the same promise. Tensions frayed. Some men began to question the wisdom of following a map that changed with the wind, while others clung to the hope that the city of gold was close. Don Ignacio, ever the stoic leader, kept his resolve firm, but even he could not deny the weight of dread growing in his chest. One evening, near a small lagoon, Apu gathered the men. "This place is sacred," he said. "The jungle tests us here. We must offer respect, or be swallowed whole." They built a fire of fragrant herbs, the smoke rising in spirals to the thick leaves above. As the flames danced, the tribe chanted, their voices weaving a spell of protection and warning. The Spaniards, some skeptical, some awed, joined hesitantly, feeling the ancient pulse of the jungle beat through the night. But not all was peace. That very night, a scream shattered the quiet. A young soldier, eyes wide with terror, had disappeared from the camp. Search parties found nothing but disturbed earth and the faintest traces of footsteps leading into the jungle. Footprints that seemed to vanish beneath the leaves. The expedition was on the edge. The map still shifted, the jungle still watched. And somewhere beyond the next ridge, the city of gold awaited, or something far darker. Days turned into weeks, and the expedition found themselves locked in a relentless struggle not with men, but with nature itself. The towering trees cast shadows so deep that daylight barely pierced the canopy, and every step forward felt like a battle against a living, breathing force determined to reclaim what was once hers. Rain fell without mercy. For 3 weeks, the skies opened in ceaseless downpour, turning trails into quagmires and rivers into raging torrents. The men's clothes clung to their skin, soaked and heavy. Their faces bore the marks of exhaustion and despair. Boots sank into the mud, carrying more water than earth, and the constant wetness invited sickness to prey on the weary. Fever crept into the camp like a silent thief. Men shivered in their hammocks, beads of sweat mingling with chills that rattled their bones. Coughs echoed through the night, mixing with the cries of strange jungle creatures. Father Esteban's prayers grew more frantic, his once steady voice now quivering as he begged for salvation in an unforgiving land. Yet, the jungle's assault was not merely physical. As days bled into nights, the dense forest began to twist reality. Shadows lengthened and shifted unpredictably. Familiar paths disappeared, replaced by endless labyrinths of vines and roots that seemed to grasp at ankles and wrists. The men found themselves walking in circles, the sun a dim memory behind the tangled leaves. Voices emerged from the depths, whispers just beyond hearing, promises and threats carried on the humid breeze. Some swore they saw figures darting between trees, pale faces staring with hollow eyes. Sleep was haunted by vivid dreams where the jungle swallowed them whole, where rivers ran black with blood, and where the gold they sought turned to ash in their hands. Don Ignacio, once unshakable, began to show cracks. He sat by the fire, tracing lines in the dirt, mumbling fragments of ancient prayers learned in youth but long forgotten. The men watched as his eyes flickered with doubt and terror, the same fear they hid beneath their own weary faces. Some soldiers, desperate and broken, turned to the trees themselves. They carved symbols into bark, whispered offerings into the wind, and claimed to hear replies, low growls and rustling leaves that no others could decipher. A small faction began to speak of spirits protecting the jungle's secrets, of curses laid upon those who dared to trespass. Illness and superstition intertwined, fracturing the once disciplined band. Arguments erupted over the smallest provocations. Trust eroded like the riverbanks after storms. Supplies dwindled, and hope became a fragile ember fighting to survive. One night, as thunder roared overhead and lightning split the sky, the jungle seemed to close in completely. The camp was surrounded by an eerie silence. No insects, no animals, just the heavy breath of the forest waiting to claim them. In that suffocating quiet, a scream pierced the darkness. A soldier had run into the trees, eyes wide with madness, speaking of voices urging him to join the shadows. He vanished into the night, never to return. The jungle was winning. And beneath the leaves, the heartbeat of the forest pulsed louder, as if mocking the folly of men who thought they could conquer what had thrived long before their arrival. The jungle had long since become a crushing weight upon the backs and spirits of Don Ignacio's expedition. Days of rain had washed away any certainty, and nights were filled with restless dreams and whispered fears. Yet nothing, no fever, no hunger, no creeping madness, prepared them for what awaited at the mouth of the Cueva de los Susurros, the Cave of Voices. They found it by accident, or perhaps the jungle itself had led them there. The entrance yawned before them like a great dark wound in the cliffside, its jagged edges covered in thick moss and lichen. A cool breath seemed to exhale from the cavern, sending chills through the damp, heavy air. The men hesitated at the threshold. The silence was deafening. No birds sang here, no insects buzzed. The only sound was a faint, constant murmur, like the soft rustling of hundreds of unseen lips. The whispers curled around their minds, teasing and teasing, impossible to understand yet impossible to ignore. Don Ignacio gripped his torch tighter, signaling the others forward. The flickering flame revealed walls etched with ancient images, spiraling figures, human forms intertwined with beasts, eyes wide and watchful. The colors had faded to muted browns and reds, but the power behind them seemed alive, pulsing with an eerie energy. As they ventured deeper, the murmurs grew louder, shifting into an almost rhythmic cadence. Mateo, the youngest soldier, pressed his palm to the stone, eyes unfocused. "It's like the cave is speaking," he whispered. The group settled in a small chamber where the walls curved like the ribcage of some long-dead creature. Around the firelight, faces were pale and drawn. Some men sat in silence, ears straining for the voices that came from everywhere and nowhere. That night, Mateo spoke again, voice trembling. "I heard a voice in my dreams. It said, 'The path lies beneath the earth. The gold is the way, but the way is a trap.'" Don Ignacio frowned deeply. "What way? What trap?" he asked, but Mateo could offer no more. Suddenly, a faint light flickered ahead. Not from any torch, but a pale, cold glow emanating from the far end of the cavern. The men froze, hearts pounding in the eerie silence. The light grew, shifting shapes into ghostly faces, expressions serene yet sorrowful, eyes filled with ancient wisdom and endless grief. The whispers rose to a haunting chorus, wrapping around them like tendrils of mist. Matteo fell to his knees, clutching his head. They know us. They remember. They wait. A sudden gust snuffed out the torches. Darkness swallowed the men whole. Panic broke loose, shouted commands, scrambling feet, cold hands grasping at shadows. When the fires finally burned again, Matteo was gone, vanished without trace. Near where he had knelt, etched deep into the stone, was a single word. Camino, the way. The cave had spoken. Outside, the jungle breathed around them, alive, watching, waiting to claim more. Weeks of hardship had tested every ounce of strength in Don Ignacio's men. But the lure of the lost city, whispered in legends and now hinted by the cryptic cave message, pushed them onward. The word Camino, the way, had become a mantra, a thread of hope woven through their exhaustion and fear. The jungle's embrace tightened as they ventured deeper. Trees grew impossibly tall, their trunks wide as towers, roots twisting like serpents beneath the sodden earth. The air hung thick with the scent of decay and blooming flowers, a dizzying mix that both beckoned and repelled. Strange sounds echoed, distant drums, calls of birds unknown to any in the party, and the soft rustle of leaves whispering secrets. One morning, as the fog lifted from a river bend, the expedition stumbled upon ruins, but not the crumbling temples or scattered stones they expected. Instead, before them lay a city, half swallowed by jungle but unmistakably built by hands both skilled and strange. Walls rose from the earth like giant bones, covered in vines and moss. Golden tiles shimmered faintly beneath layers of dirt, catching shards of sunlight that filtered through the canopy. Towers reached toward the sky, their tops lost in the mist, and narrow bridges arched over waterways that wound through the city like veins. The men paused in awe and disbelief. Was this the city of gold? Or a cruel mirage conjured by their desperate minds? Don Ignacio's heart pounded. This was more than conquest, it was discovery, revelation, and perhaps doom. They explored cautiously, stepping over cracked stones and through archways carved with strange glyphs. The air was thick with the smell of wet stone and something else, something metallic and sweet, like blood and treasure mingled. At the city's center lay a vast plaza, dominated by a towering statue of a woman with outstretched arms. Her eyes were gems that gleamed unnaturally, reflecting the light like twin stars. Around her neck hung chains of gold that clinked softly as if moved by an unseen breeze. Whispers rose again, carried by the wind and bouncing off the stone. The men felt watched, judged by the eyes of the statue and the ghosts of the city's forgotten inhabitants. Night fell swiftly, blanketing the ruins in darkness. Campfires were lit with caution, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. That night, dreams invaded once more. Soldiers saw the city alive, glowing with light, filled with laughter and music, yet underneath, a creeping shadow twisting through its streets. Some awoke in cold sweat, clutching totems and relics they did not remember taking. Don Ignacio wandered the ruins alone, fingers tracing the cold gold of the statue's necklace. A voice whispered at the edge of his hearing, a promise and a warning intertwined. The gold you seek is not a treasure to take, but a burden to bear. The dawn broke over the lost city with a fragile light, barely piercing the dense canopy that had long swallowed the ancient ruins. Don Ignacio de Mendoza and his weary men awoke to an uneasy calm, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and something far older, something ancient and restless. The city had not yielded its secrets easily. Strange glyphs carved deep into the stone walls hinted at rituals and powers beyond mortal understanding. The villagers of the surrounding jungle had always spoken in hushed tones about a curse, a dark shadow that had befallen the Golden City, dooming its people and condemning the land itself. As the expedition explored further, the signs became undeniable. A creeping malaise settled over the men. Sickness clawed at their bodies, fevers, swelling sores, and nightmares that blurred the line between dream and reality. One by one, men fell ill, their strength draining like the fading light beneath the thick jungle canopy. Father Esteban, usually steadfast, confessed his doubts. "This is no ordinary sickness," he whispered. "This is a curse, a warning etched in time." Don Ignacio refused to believe superstition. Yet, as he traced the faded symbols that spoke of sacrifice and guardianship, a chilling realization gripped him. The gold they sought was bound with a terrible price, a debt paid in blood and spirit. Late one night, as shadows stretched like fingers over the stone plaza, the camp was rocked by screams. A soldier, delirious with fever, ran into the darkness, shouting of voices calling from the depths of the jungle. Search parties found only his torn cloak and tracks leading into the dense underbrush. The men grew restless, haunted by visions of ghostly figures gliding between the trees and strange lights flickering just beyond sight. Murmurs spread of ancient spirits awakened, of the city's guardians stirring from their long slumber. Don Ignacio stood before the golden statue once more, feeling the weight of the curse pressing down like the humid air. The necklace of gold chains gleamed dully in the fading light, as if warning him to leave. But the hunger for glory and gold blinded many. And as night fell, the jungle watched, waiting for the price to be paid. The days in the lost city grew heavier, each breath laden with the thick weight of despair and unseen dread. Don Ignacio de Mendoza's expedition had been reduced, worn down not only by the unforgiving jungle, but by the insidious curse that seemed to seep from the very stones beneath their feet. The Golden City, once a beacon of promise, now felt like a tomb, silent but for the whispered voices that echoed in the dead air. The men moved like shadows, eyes hollow, haunted by dreams that refused to fade with the dawn. One evening, as a crimson sunset bled through the canopy, Don Ignacio found himself drawn once more to the central plaza, to the towering statue of the woman whose eyes gleamed like stars. The air around her shimmered, the golden chains at her neck faintly vibrating, as if alive. He reached out, tracing the cold metal, when suddenly a vision seized him, a flood of images that crashed over his mind like the raging river beyond the city. He saw the city alive, bustling markets, laughter and music, children playing beneath the golden towers. Then, darkness, flames devouring the streets, screams lost beneath the roar of the jungle reclaiming its own. The woman in the statue was once a queen, a guardian chosen by the gods to protect the city's secret. The gold was not simply wealth but a sacred power, a living force that demanded sacrifice. When greed corrupted the people, the curse fell, dooming them to eternal silence. Don Ignacio's heart pounded with terror and awe. The gold they sought was not treasure but a trap, a prison for the souls who had dared to claim it. As night swallowed the city, the surviving men gathered around the dying fire. Whispers spread that the jungle was no longer merely a place, but a judgment, and that those who remained must choose, to escape and live haunted, or to stay and become part of the legend forever. The jungle's breath grew colder, and the eyes of the statue seemed to follow them, promising power or doom.